Hi guys, I'm Sydney. Very nice introduction by Ms. Harper. And I'm here today to talk to you about what I do, how I got here, all sorts of funky stuff like that. So we are gonna start with a story. Yay, because we're cheesy like that. And it just makes it a bit easier to give a picture of how I started off and where I'm gonna be headed. Um so these are some pictures from my seventh birthday party. And so that's me in the red circles there. I was a cute kid, not so cute anymore, but that's beside the point. Um, you can probably tell from the photos this was a mad scientist themed birthday party. My entire year two class was invited and it was super cool. We did loads of fun science experiments like bottle rockets, baking soda volcanoes, lots and lots of slime, as you do when you're a kid getting interested in science. And uh, this is really just to illustrate where my interest in science originally started, but my parents really quickly realized that I needed to be doing something more useful with my life instead of making slime and chucking it at the walls and the ceiling and all over the furniture. So we fast forward quite a bit to GCSEs, bit of a dry topic, I know. But these are just the subjects that I took. I took biochem, physics, compulsory, maths and English, also compulsory. And then our school made us do one creative subject, one humanities subject, and one language at least. And then we could fill up the other slots with other subjects if we wanted. So I did music and religious studies, which I wasn't too fascinated with because it was kind of boring, not gonna lie, for me at least. And I only chose it because it had the least amount of writing. Because if you did like history and stuff, you had to do coursework and essays, and I'm not about that life. But clearly, because I have a lot of free time, I decided to do four languages as well. So I was pretty busy during GCSEs. This picture's actually from during exam month. I think it was like a couple months that GCSEs were spread over. You can see that I am a really messy person. Unfortunately, this hasn't changed since hitting like adulthood, so ooh. And you can see my notes are like scattered all over the floor. This was a particular point of concern for my mum, who always wanted to like clean the room. But I told her not to disturb my notes because they were in a really specific order, and if she did move them, there's a very high chance that I'll fail my exams. So that was enough to keep her away. And then after that, I had to start thinking about, okay, what am I gonna do after secondary school? And then we had to pick our A-level choices. I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I thought a good starting point would be picking the subjects that I'm kind of good at and that I like doing. So I took biology and chemistry and maths, and then I did a fourth A level Japanese just to balance out like the STEM heavy subjects. I also did an EPQ. I don't know if your school does an EPQ, but it basically counts as another A level, and it's an independent research project where you go away, do some research, and then write like a long essay about it with references and the whole shebang. I did mine on how biotech could improve the food industry, and that's to do with growing crops in places where we don't normally grow them. So, like in the desert or up in the mountains. And the goal of that was to be able to grow food in such a way that we use up some of the land that we already have without having to clear out more forests and cut down trees and things like that. So here's some pictures from A levels. The middle and right hand side pictures are from an ecology trip we did in year 12. We went to Wales, we went to a beach, and it was like I did get in trouble on this trip. You can see that I'm wearing a fishing suit. And while everyone else was staying on land, sampling all of the plants and the bugs and the crustaceans, I was actually going out into the ocean and catching fish with my bare hands. So, yeah, teachers didn't like that, so I did get in trouble. But we were the only group to have fish in our project, so it made it a lot more interesting for them to look at. So I see it as an absolute win. And then we get to the dreaded university application stage, and then I still didn't know what I wanted to do, and the deadline was fast approaching, and I was like, I'll just pick something and run with it. So I applied for this course called Natural Sciences, which I like to call the science degree for people with commitment issues. Because what they do is they just give you a bunch of science modules and then you pick whatever ones you want to do. So, like biology, chemistry, computer science, if you wanted, um, physics, etc., etc. And not all of the universities I applied for had this as an option, so we'll come on to that in a little bit. Applied for Cambridge, got rejected, no big deal. I only applied for Cambridge because my parents told me to do it. I got accepted pretty much everywhere else, so that made up for it. I had a good choice of universities to pick from, I thought. And anyone who's considering university, let me tell you, I highly recommend it. There's a lot more lab work if you study a life sciences degree, so it's more hands-on compared to secondary school, which I enjoyed because I like getting my hands stuck into stuff. And it not only helped me grow academically being at university, but it also helped me to grow as a person. So I spent the first couple weeks of university, instead of going out to all of the freshers events and stuff, I stayed holed up in my room playing games on my PlayStation and crying myself to sleep every night because I was not making any friends. I didn't know anyone. And then I decided that I'd had enough, and then I went out, and then I found my friend group. So it all worked out in the end. And I look back on it a little bit. It's a bit embarrassing, but we move. And I'm more confident as a person now, which is why I'm able to do presentations like this. So that's pretty cool. And that brings us up to today. So here are the basics about me. I study biotechnology at Imperial College. So that means I combine biology and chemistry to apply them to real life problems. So things like making medicines or growing crops or hijacking bacterial DNA to make them digest plastic or make stuff in general. And I haven't actually graduated yet. So I'm doing a placement year at a company called Immunotherapy, and we are an immunotherapy company, and I'll be talking about that a little more in a little bit. In my spare time, I like cooking, eating, playing video games, been getting really into Elden Ring recently, and building lots and lots of Lego. So yeah, that's about me. Um, Here's a little bit about the kind of stuff you study in a degree like mine. So, it is widely the same amongst universities. They'll add their own little spin on it, so it'll differ a little bit. But what I like about science is that it's pretty consistent, and so all of the taught content is basically the same, no matter what course you apply for. There's three broad areas of knowledge which I've split it up into. So there's genes, which is like the smallest biomolecule that you're going to be working with. So that's of course DNA, and how it replicates, how it repairs itself, how it determines our physical characteristics, like how tall we are, what eye color we have, hereditary diseases. Shameless plug about the Imperial course is that it's really up to date with the current industry trends. So if anyone's heard of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, the course has also been updated to reflect that within the last year. So I think that's pretty awesome of Imperial to do. Proteins are my personal favorite, so step up from genes. Genes make proteins. And everything in biology pretty much depends on how proteins work, so how they're structured, how they function, how they interact with each other. Determining protein structure is a pretty big area of research within like biochem, biotech. So we get to play around with cool modeling software like you can see here. For those of you in the know about like protein structure and stuff, you can see the red alpha helices on the outside and the yellow beta sheets on the inside. And sometimes you'll have extra molecules attached to the proteins, which is what's in blue in the middle there. Cells are like the first thing everyone thinks of when they hear the word biology. I personally don't like cells that much, but lots of people do, don't get me wrong. And it's a very, very big topic. Obviously, cancer features quite a lot in this because cancer is just the abnormal multiplication and replication of our own cells. But we deal with structure, Specialization, so different kinds of cells like neurons versus muscle cells versus liver cells, immune cells, um, and how they move, how they communicate, how they stick to each other. So cells is a very, very big topic. Um, and yeah, so that's the three broad areas of knowledge. In terms of like practical hands-on work, oh, my bad. Of course, there's lab work, but you should expect most courses these days to have some element of programming in them, simply because we're living in the 21st century and computers are pretty much a part of everything that we do. So we need to figure out ways to use them, and it's becoming an increasing expectation that current generation scientists will need to know a little bit of coding, especially for data analysis and bioinformatics. So what that means is we use computers for working with DNA and stuff and genes. So if you decide that you like working with genes, it is entirely likely that you'll have to learn a little bit of programming. They do teach you, so not to worry, don't let this put you off. They're not teaching you to be a software engineer at Google or anything, so it's not going to be anything too complicated, just some basic script writing to help speed up your workflows. And here are the kinds of careers you can expect after doing a degree like mine. So I've split them up into inside versus outside the lab. Inside the lab kind of speaks for itself. It's the stuff where you work inside a lab. So healthcare and medicine is kind of a no-brainer. Biotech and pharma is where I work, so I actually make medicines and stuff. Environmental science also features in this, so things like air quality, water quality, improving those, waste management as well, recyclable waste, and trying to recycle materials which we can't currently recycle. That's also a big area of research. Agriculture and food is very, very underrated. I did my EPQ on it, so I kind of know what I'm talking about. So the population of the world is just kind of, it's going through a boom, and there's going to be more people, and our current food production standards can't handle that many people currently, so we are desperately trying to find ways to grow more food and make it last for longer, increase its shelf life. So this is also very, very big, and I think we need more people to go into this because, sure, like making cancer medicine is cool and stuff, but everyone needs to eat. So I'd say food is pretty important. Cosmetics, so making makeup. It's good if you have a biotech degree because you'll be able to manufacture chemicals in such a way that they don't damage organic surfaces like your skin or make it feel super greasy. Forensic science, self-explanatory. Bioinformatics, I gave its own little niche because it's becoming much bigger, like exponentially bigger. So if you know how to do science and you know how to use computers, the job market is very, very big. They will pay you a lot simply because we don't currently have enough people to fill this gap. Outside the lab is where you want to apply your STEM knowledge, but like you don't want to work in a lab anymore. So teaching, raising the next generation of scientists. Consulting, I get, is just like bossing pharma companies around, telling them how to make more money, do more business, make more drugs, things like that. Science communication has also, we've seen the increasing relevance of science communication, especially because we went through the pandemic and there was a lot of misinformation being spread around. So it's more important than ever that we get people who can accurately communicate science to people who don't necessarily do science normally as part of their lives. Regulatory affairs is if you still want to be in drug development, but you don't want to work in the lab. You're like the drug police, basically, making sure no one does anything illegal in terms of manufacturing standards and making sure that everything's up to code. You deal a lot with like the approval process and sending clinical data to like the FDA or the UK equivalent of the FDA, which is the MHRA. There are entire companies dedicated to recruiting scientists for pharma companies. So recruiting companies, but specifically for life sciences. And if you have a life sciences degree, you'll be highly valued because you'll know what sorts of skills to look for. And more importantly, what questions to ask potential candidates. And IP and patent law is also quite a lucrative profession. So being in the legal department of every pharma company. And this is because like drugs are intellectual property of companies, and they need people who can protect these and avoid them getting stolen or copied by other people. So every pharma company will have a legal department. And as someone who's done a little bit of like legal internships and stuff, I can safely say it is the most scientist-friendly part of law. If you're a bit afraid of like studying law because of all the, legal jargon and things like that, patent law is very understandable for anyone who's like more science-oriented. So that might be a potential career path to go down. I thought I'd talk a little bit about my placement now, since that's all the uni stuff out of the way. It's different from an internship, but only in the sense that it's longer, and there are a lot of benefits from staying longer at a company compared to like an internship. So I'm between my second and third year of uni. So next year I'm going to have to go back and finish up my degree, and you gain real life work experience, but staying longer for a year rather than an internship, which is like 3 months. There's a lot of benefits, such as making connections, growing your professional network. If you stay longer at a company, you're gonna be able to form more meaningful relationships, which is good, because these might be the people you go to later in life to ask for a job. And also, you're able to see the priorities of your company change over time. So working in life sciences is quite a dynamic industry. We're constantly on the move, so you'll be able to see like how the industry changes, how the company works. And is there anything else I need to say about this? Oh yeah, so for an internship, you might not be able to get much done if you're working in the lab, because the first couple months are usually spent training you up on really specialized equipment. So if you're only going to stay there for 3 months, then it's entirely likely you'll spend the 2 months training yourself up and then be only able to do any actual interesting work for a month. So for a placement, you get the rest of the 10 months to be able to carry out an independent project. So I think in that respect, it's better. The department I work for specifically is called Analytical Development, and that means I develop methods suitable for analyzing drug molecules, which still sounds like a whole lot of nothing. Basically, what happens is the research team who's in charge of actually discovering the drug and producing it gives it to us in the development team, and they ask us like, hey, is there anything that we can make better about this, or does it actually work? And then we in development, we perform a bunch of tests and then feed the information back to the research team and say that, yeah, it's kind of okay, but like we could make it better by changing this, this, and this about it. The research team will then incorporate these changes and then feed this back to us in development, and then we give it back to them, and then it's back to us. You get the idea. And the tests that we perform are called stress tests. That means we break down the drug, which seems kind of counterintuitive because we work so hard to make it. But there is a point to this. Stress tests break down the drug, so they give us information like how stable it is, what kind of stress it can withstand, how efficient it is, what actually happens when it breaks down. So, and the mechanisms of how it breaks down, so we can figure out how to prevent it from breaking down, and so it can last longer, basically. And I use mass spectrometry and chromatography to analyze these drug molecules. And these are the instruments in the red rectangle there. And when I'm not doing lab work, I'm reading papers and analyzing my data. So analyzing data is the most time-consuming part of my job. The lab work actually isn't that, it doesn't take up a lot of my time. It's the data analysis, because being able to actually interpret it and tell my boss what it means accurately as well. There's a lot of data to go through, so it's important that I get that right. Here's a picture of the lab that I work in. You can see there's the mass spectrometer there, and it's hooked up to the chromatography machine, and we've got another setup on the right. When kids ask me how big they are, I do this presentation for like primary school kids as well. They always want to know how big it is. So the metric that I'm currently going with is it's about the size of like 5 to 6 primary school students put together, and they are very heavy and very expensive. So they're pretty cool to work with. That's me working with the chromatography machine. What's what I'm doing is I'm putting some drug vials inside, and what it will do is there's a needle which sucks up all the liquid inside, and then it pumps that liquid into the mass spectrometer, which it's hooked up to. And the mass spec is actually in charge of analyzing these molecules, and then it spits out a bunch of numbers and graphs for me to look at. So yeah, that's what my lab work mainly consists of. And speaking of like why I'm doing all of this lab work, there's obviously a point to all of this. I'm not just mucking about in the lab because I can and it's fun, which it is. There's got to be some sort of like higher purpose and end goal, if it were. So I mentioned the company I work for specializes in immunotherapy. That means we create drugs which boost the immune system instead of having to rely on an external substance to defeat diseases for us. And by teaching our own white blood cells to defeat disease, it is potentially a benefit because we can have longer lasting immunity as a result. And on the off chance that we get infected again by a specific disease, our immune system stands a much better chance at being able to fight it off itself instead of having to take more drugs. And this approach of being able to teach your immune cells to recognize and defeat foreign bodies in your body means that we can tailor this approach to things like cancer, obviously, because that's a big one, and other infectious diseases, as well as some autoimmune conditions. So HIV as well is another project that we're working on. Loads of different kinds of immunotherapy. We're not going to go into details about all of them because that would take forever. All you really need to know is that antibodies and CAR T cells are just another word for white blood cells. Those were what the founding fathers of immunotherapy were. And then companies started to get more adventurous and branch out and think outside the box. So my company works with T cell receptors, so just the receptors on the surface of white blood cells. And other companies are even more wacky and crazy than that. They've made viruses which can actually infect cancer cells specifically and break them apart, but leave your healthy cells alone. And some have even tried making vaccines for cancer. This is not an exhaustive list. There are different kinds of approaches out there, but these are just some of the main players within the industry currently. Immunotherapy is a fairly recent development. It's only been recognized within the past 20 years or so. So it's still a relatively new field. A lot of current students are excited about immunotherapy because like it's hip, it's it's popular with the kids. And it's just really cool to be able to do this. It's like sort of the first step to personalized medicine and being able to tailor approaches specifically to patients and give patients a better chance at like quality of life. Immunotherapy is a lot better than radio and chemo because radio and chemotherapy, they don't it's not specialized, it's not targeted, it can harm your healthy cells as well. That's why like your stuff like your hair starts falling out because it targets rapidly multiplying cells, and hair cells are also quite rapidly multiplying despite not being cancer cells. So immunotherapy means that we can target cancer cells specifically, which is why people are so excited about it. This is just an example, and this example is what our company makes, or at least like a watered down version of it. So you can see we've got germs or cancer cells, looking pretty angry, wreaking a lot of havoc in your body, making you feel not so great. We don't want that. So you take our drug, and what it does is it sticks on the surface of these pathogens or cancer cells, and then it attracts white blood cells by emitting a sort of signal, not a Wi-Fi signal, like some people have asked me in the past, more of a chemical signal, and it sort of acts as a beacon, and it makes the presence of these germs or cancer cells more obvious to our immune system. So what our white blood cells will do, they're just chilling in the blood, just another day in the human body, nothing wrong here, nothing to report. They detect the signal, and then they're like, oh no, we got to go defeat the germs. And then after receiving the signal, they'll actually move towards where the germs or cancer cells are, and then release chemicals which like break them apart, and then they can be recycled into materials for your body to use. So that's pretty cool. Some of you who are like pretty well versed in A-level immunology will be like, wait, so what is the point of having the drug as the middleman if it's the white blood cell's job to like have receptors and recognize the presence of these germs in the first place? Surely they must be able to detect them by themselves. You are absolutely correct, but the reason that we've made this drug is because in practice, cancer cells are really difficult to detect. They they evolve specifically so that they can hide from our immune system. They have a very low antigen density in comparison to other pathogens, which is why they're so difficult to detect. Also, because they're just mutated versions of our own cells, they share a lot of similarity, which makes it even more difficult to differentiate between them. Hence why our drug targets specifically proteins which are present in cancer cells, and we're able to recognize them like this. So what's next after university? Like what kind of jobs am I going to get? So I've already talked about specific careers, and this is just going to be a typical career progression if you decide to go into a lab-based role. So let's say you've done your GCSEs, you've done your A-levels, what next? What most people will do, and what I'm currently doing, is that we go to university, get our bachelor's, that's 3 years, and then after that, you can enter into an associate scientist role. So this is the lowest level of scientist within any company. So you're given some level of autonomy, but it's like you do projects, but they're mostly directed, and you do a little bit of planning, but mostly you're taking orders from your boss. A lot of people will do a master's and decide that a bachelor's isn't enough. So that's an extra 1 or 2 years, depending on your course. And then you can enter into a scientist role, which is above associate scientist. Don't ask me why associate scientist is below scientist, because it has more words in the title. That's just how it is. And more often than not, people will decide that a master's still isn't enough, and then they'll do a PhD, which is another 3 or 4 years, and it's very independent. I should note that it is possible to go straight to a PhD from a bachelor's. However, you do need good grades, which shouldn't be too hard considering I'm confident that you're all bright and capable individuals. But like you do need good supervisor and professor connections as well, which not a lot of people have at their bachelor's generally because like bachelor's is for figuring out university. It's totally different from school. It's really independent. And obviously you want to be like making friends and stuff and taking part in all of the stuff that university has to offer. So networking isn't necessarily the first thing on everyone's mind. So like yeah, this is, I wouldn't say it's rare. It's not common, but it is possible. And after getting a PhD, you can enter into a senior or principal scientist position, depending on how much experience you have. If you're doing like internships while you're in university, or maybe a placement year like mine, you can possibly negotiate for a principal scientist role if you've done a PhD. But that's at the discretion of the company who's choosing to hire you. The red arrows denote like this is a typical career progression within science. You spend 1 to 2 years at each level, and then you get promoted. And you can always go back to school after you start work. That is possible. You're allowed to do that. In fact, some companies will actually fund your degrees if they believe you have potential, or you're going to study a course which they know that the skills that you're going to learn are particularly in demand. So that's the university route. We got to talk about apprenticeships as well. So, I think when people think about apprenticeships, they think of like maybe trade jobs or like, you know, not science, because everyone thinks you need to get a bachelor's to go into science. But fundamentally, science is a very hands-on subject. So I think apprenticeships are pretty good, or like the perfect framework. In fact, probably even better than university for getting into science, because you get to study while also working. There are different levels of apprenticeships. You can go from your GCSEs, but companies do prefer that you do A levels first, simply because it gives you the good foundational knowledge that you need to succeed in the apprenticeship. And these can last anything from 3 to 6 years, and after that you can be in anything from an associate to senior scientist position, and then after that you move to a principal scientist position. And you're just studying on the job, you're treated like any other employee. Don't believe that apprenticeships are like a super niche thing and that only small companies will offer them. That's not true. A lot of the big shot, like big name companies do offer apprenticeships. So like GSK, AstraZeneca, Roche, Pfizer, they all offer apprenticeships. So I think companies are becoming more aware that this is like a legitimate qualification. And probably even maybe better than university in some respects, because you get trained up in the industry knowledge and you learn how to apply it faster. So that's sort of a roadmap of a career progression and how to get into your first lab-based entry-level role. So some things to keep in mind about science. Equipment can be temperamental. So the mass specs are pretty high maintenance. It's like they can smell fear. If you've ever had to like print homework on the day that it's due and then the printer just doesn't work, it's kind of like that. If I need to do an experiment and then I need it on that specific day and then the mass spec chooses that day to break down, then that's like frustrating, and then I have to put it off for another couple of weeks while we get an engineer to come in and fix it and figure out what's wrong. So clinical trials also have a really high failure rate, which can put a lot of people off. So for reference, 90% of drug projects are doomed to fail. That's a nice statistic to think about. This combined with the fact that research takes a long time, from the point that a drug is discovered to the point that it's actually approved for commercial use on real patients in hospitals, that can take 12 to 15 years. So the high failure rate combined with the long time it takes to make drugs means one of two things. If you're lucky, you'll see results, but it'll be a long time before you see any. And what's more likely is that you'll pour your blood, sweat, and tears into a drug project only for the government to be like, your clinical data is not good enough, so we're not going to approve your drug. And then you'll have to start from scratch. So that can be pretty exhausting for a lot of people. And sometimes stuff just doesn't work. I triple check the variables, I do all the calculations, and then it still goes wrong. I don't get the results that I expect. And that's okay. You're allowed to make mistakes in science, but learning from your mistakes is also like an important part of the job. So given all of this, it pays to be resilient in science and I guess never give up, as cheesy as it sounds. But it is like a good message to carry with you if you want to go into this field. And I'll just end on my favorite parts of working in science. Every day is different. I get to come into work every day and I'll decide like if I'm going to work in the lab all day or if I'm going to crunch numbers and make graphs all day on Excel or do presentations like this. That's also part of my job, telling you guys about the cool science that we do. And I like seeing stuff in action, being able to see the stuff I've learned in classes and lectures being applied to real life experiments. This might just be a me thing. It's probably a me thing. I really like touching all of the machines and all the shiny buttons and the colorful wires, because we don't get to do that at university, so having an actual job is like a dream come true. I'm like a kid at Christmas. And it's nice knowing that even though I'm like mucking about in the lab, having loads of fun, my work will eventually go on to save someone's life somewhere, hopefully. We've been really lucky in that January we had a drug approved for eye cancer. It's the first drug ever of its kind, and also the first drug ever for this specific kind of eye cancer. So we're going to be able to save a lot of lives. My colleagues are really awesome. My boss is really cool. Everyone's really smart, which makes me feel really dumb a lot of the time. But it means that I have a lot to learn still, and that's going to be a part of my job, That's going to be a part of your job if you decide to go into science, constantly learning. You never stop learning. And when everything finally clicks into place, maybe a problem that I've been struggling with for a couple of weeks, I finally get an answer to, that's a really satisfying feeling. And I think a lot of us who work in science are constantly trying to chase that high of, woo, I got it right. So, those are my closing thoughts for this presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope it was useful and that you took something away from this, and I'll happily take any questions if anyone has them.
Sydney, thank you so very much indeed for that presentation. I think and I hope students have really appreciated. I've definitely enjoyed that myself, not having taken science to anything like that level. But students, please do type away in the chat box for questions that you have. And I know we'll keep an eye on those, Faye and myself. Meanwhile, whilst anybody is thinking of typing, we had a couple of questions in advance, Sydney, and I wonder if you could address a couple of those.
Yeah,
Please.
of course. Yeah.
First of all, somebody asked, do STEM careers typically have a high salary? And I think you touched on salaries. It's always interesting that, you know, and a very important aspect of looking at careers and prospects. Could you just sort of talk a little bit about that?
So the thing about salary is that the UK is still pretty behind in terms of paying scientists because even though the work is super intensive and you do have to go through a lot of rigorous educational training to do science, the pay in comparison is not as good as it could be. This is why, like, a lot of companies and a lot of startups in biotech generally list on like stock exchanges in the United States rather than the UK, simply because it pays better and a lot more people are willing to invest in the United States compared to the UK. So currently, I'm getting paid 20K for a year, which is a lot for a broke student like me. Um, Couple that with like I forgot what it's called. Oh yeah, student loans, student loans. So it's a nice, like, hefty source of income for me. Most of it goes to bills, but like, you know, that's just part of learning how to adult. Um, so I think entry level jobs are like 35K on average. As you move up to senior and principal scientist, you can get around like 70K-ish. Um, so yeah, I hope that answers the salary question.
Yeah, it does. I think that shows the sort of progression pattern and the starting salary and the potentials, I think, which is really helpful. Um, Emily, can you take your camera off for us, Emily? Thank you. Um, just a couple of questions have come through, one from Evie. Are you planning on going to do a master's or PhD, or do you like the company you're currently working at? So obviously, I know you've got further studies to do after your year, but do you think you will go on to study a master's or PhD?
Yeah, so I'm planning to do a master's because my decision to do a master's rather than a PhD is mostly for the fact that like I want to start making money earlier.
Yeah.
Because PhD, you're still technically a student. You do receive income, but like it's a very small amount compared to what I could be earning if I went straight into work. So I'm gonna do like a master's. Fingers crossed, I'll be doing it in the States. I've applied for like scholarships and stuff. I'll be doing it in bioengineering, so adding an
That's
engineering element, and
that's
making it even more multidisciplinary. So that's the plan.
That's super. And actually, that kind of answers one of the questions that I was going to ask about studying and working abroad with opportunities. And I guess there are a huge amount of opportunities both in Europe and beyond, globally, as it
Oh
were.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So my decision to apply to the States is mostly based on the fact that the US is very big on biotech. They have a lot of biotech hubs. They're like, I think they're the global leaders of biotech at the moment. So Silicon Valley, particularly, is, you know, where a lot of technology is. Um, Philadelphia as well, so the other side of America, they have a lot of cell and gene therapy companies, so stuff like what I'm doing, immunotherapy. So that's also a lot of potential there. Germany and Switzerland are also very good. And Japan, China, yeah, so these are the main players in biotech at the moment.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And Bobby has asked, the studying at Imperial, how is living in a city? I'm tending towards avoiding city university, but do you think that isn't necessary? And I think that's actually a really interesting question, because students are currently looking at obviously their next steps, which is potentially university, or indeed, as you quite rightly said, the array of apprenticeships. And although they're hugely competitive, we would equally encourage students to look at those routes. But how do you feel about living in a city?
I've lived in a city all my life, so like I don't particularly mind it. Um, but then again, I don't go outside that much. I stay holed up in my room quite a lot, so maybe I don't experience the city life as much as other people. Um, what? I quite like being in the city because there's a lot of stuff to do, you know? There's all of my favorite restaurants. Eating's a very big part of my life, so um yeah, that's quite important to me personally. Being out here, there's not a lot of like places to go eat, which is fine. Like I mostly cook at home anyway. It's just if I want to treat myself, then yeah.
Um,
But I quite like the city. There's lots of like attractions and stuff as well, so things to do, mini golf, bowling, escape rooms. So lots of stuff to do with your friends once you've made them.
And I guess what I would suggest to all students, particularly to Bobby in this instance, is perhaps to go and experience a range of universities, whether those be campus or whether they be city universities, and possibly talk to other students about their experiences, and gain some actual conversations about that and see what the benefits are. And it's personal choice in the end, I think, isn't it, as well, and affordability. There are obviously pros and cons. Evie has asked, as someone who's never done computer science, how easy is it to learn and how important is it? I know you've referred both to the sort of data analysis and also programming.
Oh, so coding and stuff. If
Yeah.
you know how math works, you'll know how programming works. It looks like looking at it initially, if you look at a bit of code, it's like, what the hell am I looking at? But once you break it down and learn the ins and outs of it, it's like simple addition. A lot of like programming is just loops, which is like a sort of kind of a decision making kind of process. It's like if this condition is fulfilled, then do this. If not, then do something else. And if anything else, then do something else. So once you break it down into smaller bits, it's quite easy to learn. So I don't let computer science turn you off from doing life sciences. It's like a small part, a significant part, but still fairly small. So I wouldn't let it put you off pursuing it.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Katie has asked, why is it rare to go from a bachelor's to a PhD? Is it only due to lack of connections?
PhD work is very different from bachelor's work because you'll be thrust into an independent research project. To apply for a PhD as well, you need to write a project proposal, which means that you already need to have an idea about what kind of project you're going to carry out for 3 to 4 months, which is pretty daunting for any bachelor's student to do. And some people just simply aren't prepared enough in a bachelor's, they feel, which is why there's an intermediate master's step, which most people do. The lack of connections is also a big limiting factor. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, because first year of university, you're not going to be thinking about networking with professors and going to conferences and meeting them. That's just not what most people do during university because it's a totally new environment, people you've never met before, learning stuff which is like beyond A level and any sixth form qualification. So there's a lot of stuff to take in. And in practice, no one's going to have the supervisor connections necessary to go straight to a PhD. So that would be the main reason.
I guess the precursor to that is Fabian's question as well about, did the nature or difficulty of work change a lot when going to university? And I guess that's the kind of the bit from A levels to university as opposed to university and onwards. Did the nature and difficulty of the work kind of change when you went on to your BSc?
So, BSCs are a lot different from A levels because it's a lot more independent. They can't make you go to lectures. They're not going to take attendance. You don't, yeah. So, like, you don't even need to go to the classes. You just need to pass the exams. But that also means that they're not going to spoon feed you. They'll give you the lectures, do their 1 hour, and then expect you to, if you don't understand anything, either ask them specifically, but they'll expect you to study up by yourself in your spare time. So, like, going to the library, renting a textbook, and just, covering all of your gaps in your knowledge. They also expect you to do extra reading. Extra reading nets you a lot of points in exams because it's all very well that you know like the content and stuff, but you won't be able to get super high marks unless you figure out how this is actually useful and prove that you've actually taken an interest in the topic. So it's a lot more independent and you have to discipline yourself at university. So it sounds scary, like it's actually not as big of a deal as I'm making it sound. It's pretty easy to get into it. First couple of weeks might be a bit rocky, but after that it's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of getting the flow of it now. So yeah.
Like, I guess from GCSE to A level is one jump, but it's very different, as you say, in terms of perhaps the independence and the type of work that you do being more research based and knowledge that you have to gain by yourself, not actually in the classroom. And
Yeah,
there's a lot
exactly.
of that in A levels, but more, of course, in the BSc. And Nana has asked an interesting question about wanting to do biomedical engineering. Would it be better to choose a university course in engineering or biology, or is there not much difference? I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts on that actually are, because I can see
Um,
difference in emphasis.
there are courses specifically for biomedical engineering, so you could just go do that. That would solve your problem pretty easily, I think. Um, so it'd probably be best to do biology. But then again, I see the merits of going into engineering. Engineering will be very heavy on like maths and physics and stuff, which biomedical engineering does not a lot of. It depends what specific kind of engineering you're interested in. So if you're thinking biomedical engineering in terms of gene editing cells and like changing their genetic makeup, I'd go down the biology route. But if you mean biomedical engineering by making cybernetic prosthetics and stuff like that, so robotics and stuff, then I'd probably go down the engineering route. And either one you take, they will give you the opportunity to specialize in third year. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem. But just think about what specific bit of biomedical engineering that you're interested in before you pick one.
And I think visiting universities and attending open days where you get to talk to staff, and Faye's been putting in the chat all of the links. Thank you, Faye, for doing that. And there's one on the biomedical engineer job profile through the Prospects website. And I would recommend to all students that website is really good to look at those job profiles to get more specifics about the kind of routes into the professions and STEM. STEM, of course, covers science, technology, engineering and maths. Today we've been looking with Sydney at the life sciences and extensions of that, and we are holding other talks this week. We're talking tomorrow with an IT company about more sort of the computer aspect, computer science and data analysis. So there's a lot of talks this week and ongoing throughout the speaker series and progression week, touching on other areas of STEM. But it's been so interesting to hear your views and your experiences, Sydney, I think. I wonder if there are no further questions. I have one last question that was asked by somebody in advance, and perhaps we can wrap up with that if we have no further questions. Do you think studying STEM subjects gives skills I can use in a range of jobs, and what type of jobs are the most typical? I think that's
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
So if you guys can like cast your memory back to that slide I talked about with all the different careers and stuff. Consulting is particularly a popular industry for STEM graduates to go into if they decide they don't want to stay in STEM. It doesn't even have to be like science specific consulting. It's usually stuff like management consulting, business development, things like that. And consulting's a pretty popular industry because it involves problem solving, which is something they teach you a lot when you're doing a science degree, so it's pretty useful. And also how to think logically through a problem. Data analysis is like a job that's pretty much applicable. I mean, a skill that's pretty much applicable to any job. So science will definitely give you that. So there is like an out. There are other options if you decide that science isn't the right pathway for you. If you want to be a lawyer or work in business, there's also scope for that with the STEM degree. Because it'll give you all of these like skills like independence, problem solving, logical thinking, how to like write a paper concisely, how to do research. So these are all really useful skills. So you're not going to close any doors for yourself.
That's brilliant. And it is actually, as you say, it's the reverse of that. It's opening doors in a variety of fields. It's interesting as well that I imagine where you work in the laboratory and the offices, when you think about that, that each of those buildings has specifically been designed by architects, quantity surveyors, all sorts of people have worked on there, and within the company there must be HR, there must be IT, and so it just shows that companies within the field rely upon a whole raft of other professions, and I think that's really interesting. I know that in Switzerland, for instance, I have a contact there who actually is a quantity surveyor in a biosphere, building plants in order to build the drugs that you're obviously involved in. And I think, as you mentioned, across the globe, there are many companies that are building places to develop these. So it's a raft of professions that go into something very specific. And obviously today we're talking about life sciences, but across the STEM subject, there is a need for all sorts of individuals. So do look at the contacts and the details that we put in the chat, the connections there and links. All of those I think you find very useful. And if we may, Sydney, can we circulate your PowerPoint after the presentation?
Yeah,
so
of course.
We can ask students to refer to that in the future.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Sydney, for sharing all of those experiences. Sydney is a STEM ambassador, and we would like to thank her very much indeed for attending this evening. And if we have any further questions from students and you'd like to email careers@keds.ac.uk, we can forward those, I'm sure, to Sydney, and hope she would be happy to respond to those.
Yeah, definitely. No
Lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed for this evening, and I hope, students, that you've enjoyed that and that you'll make use of the information. And there you are, there's our careers at. We'll circulate the recording. So thank you very much, Sydney, and thank you, students, for attending this evening's talk too.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you, Sydney.